Hello and welcome to the Recognized Authority. I'm your host, Alastair McDermott, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Florian Heinrichs. Florian, welcome to the show.
Hi, very good to be here.
Yeah, so Florian, I know you primarily through LinkedIn because you post some really great stuff up there for around
Thank you.
content creation for consultants, people like that. Your background, you are coming from that corporate consulting world, Accenture, and some of those other big names in the consulting world. Can you tell me why creating content is such an important thing for experts and thought leaders and consultants to do?
Oh, yeah, well, I'm biased obviously because I've been in that space for about 10 years. But I think there's a couple of angles we can take, right? One is the obvious business development reason, right? There's lots of studies. I don't know if you are near the UK, I presume, right? So there's
Hmm.
this agency called GRIST. They run this value of thought leadership research, for example, regularly. The most recent episode had numbers in them stating that I think 9 out of 10 executives say, "Oh, content and thought leadership content in particular absolutely influence my business decisions." There even was a line about how if you as a firm do not produce thought leadership content in the area of their interest, they might consider switching vendors. That's a big one actually, if true, right? If you think about it. Um, and then, so that's the official, we all heard that version. I have another add-on perspective, which people tend to not like. But if seen from a certain angle, you could say a few things about consulting services in general. And there are exceptions to this rule, but in general, they're often nice to have services. They're not must-have services. Right? If I run a business, I need certain liability insurances. I need, I don't know, an auditor and someone to doing my taxes, and I need payroll and all that. I do not need a digital transformation necessarily if my business is doing fine, right? I might not be convinced. So consulting often, not always, but often a nice to have. And then also it's a commodity. And consulting executives really hate that one because they come back at me and say, no, it's not a commodity. They're hiring my team. It's a people business. And all of that is true, but it's only true once you have the relationship. And until you have the relationship, there's 100 firms every morning in my inbox offering me, I don't know, the digital transformation or the Salesforce implementation or the supply chain fix or whatever it is, right? So uh, buyers have a ton of choice. So you got to stand out from there and you got to make the case for your own service to get over that nice to have hurdle. So you really have to be clear about why would I need that? Why would I even consider that? And then, yeah, you have to make very clear why you are the expert to go with. And thought leadership and content are just the best ways to do it. Because I think of them honestly as the free sample of the consulting world, right? Or the product demo,
Right.
as
Yeah.
software vendors might have it. I get to see how you think, get to see how you work, and that's good. Best way to do
Yeah.
it.
For me, it's about you're demonstrating your expertise in public.
Yeah,
So you're sharing your knowledge, and the free sample is a great way of putting it. But you're building an audience as well,
yeah,
which is something that's interesting. And I saw a quote from a guy called Alex Hermosi recently, where he was talking about creating content for social media, and in how people see it as ephemeral. So they create something and they create it in a single use and it's gone. But what he's saying is it took him a long time to realize
yeah,
that
yeah.
the audience was not the compounding asset. Sorry, the content was not the compounding asset. The audience is the compounding asset, which is a really interesting way of looking at it,
Yeah.
because you're growing this audience who are consuming the content that you're putting out there and are interested in it. Not all of them may be potential buyers, potential clients, but a lot of them might be, and a lot of people who they know might be potential clients. So you're expanding your network in that way. So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, and that is an interesting aspect because this reminds me of a client conversation that was in 2 weeks ago where we had this funny situation where there's a bunch of partners in the room and some of them are convinced of marketing and why it's helpful, others not so much. And then the story came up of a major account they had won based on some article one of the marketing friendly partners had written 3 years ago. That was his main argument. He said, yeah, but and they eventually came through because of this article, but it was 3 years later, which is probably the same point, right? The audience is there, they will read and listen in, and eventually, if they're ready, they come to you. That, that's the business development angle, I think, of why doing this. I
Hmm.
do like to think that there is, and it's certainly true for my business, probably yours as well. There's also this aspect of it improves the business. Because if you
Hmm.
do thought leadership regularly, it'll improve the thinking. It has to. It's a forcing function
Yeah.
of your consultants, and I see that lead to greater service delivery, and in many cases, certainly in the large firms, IP creation. Because if you, I don't know, you have the big money and you do the major spiel where you run a research program and that survey leads to some terrific insight and you build like a diagnostic tool on the back of it, right? Self-assessment, benchmark your own against our survey sample. You do that for a couple of years. Suddenly you sit on a trove of data and you can build a software solution on top of this. So there is more to this than just marketing. But I think that's probably not for today. I just wanted to call that out
Yeah,
because
I think particularly for people who are interested in developing their own skills
yeah,
and who are interested in becoming, if they're not already at the place where they might consider themselves a thought leader,
yeah,
then I think that it's a great way to get there, particularly writing about it, because the process of writing, it makes those pathways in your brain, it makes those connections. When you have to write something, you have to deeply understand it and think about it. So I think that writing is a great way to actually develop your own perspective, your own point of view, your own voice about how you talk. I think it's such an important skill, and I'm sure people are worried about things like AI. And like AI is never going to replace that. It can't come up. It can't write in that way. It can't provide those insights. It's really great at creating average content.
yeah.
And it's great for creating the shitty first draft. I think that's what it is absolutely brilliant at. But the process of writing, I think, is really important for people to go through. So,
Yeah.
but let's get on to the
Or
kind of the
podcasting for that matter, right? Everybody who has a podcast. So any similar exercise
yeah.
where you force yourself to your point with the expertise to create expertise which you then publish and you have a
Hmm.
very decent short sort of feedback cycle.
When you
You can't
when
help
you
but
have
get
to
better at your stuff. Sorry.
Yeah, when you have to demonstrate your expertise in public, it's very different than just knowing something for yourself and maybe working with clients one on one. When you actually have to put it out there and be able to defend it in the public arena, you are going to be more careful about your thinking and your logic, and so I think that really does make a difference. But yeah, let's talk about connecting the actual content. So I think that we both have pretty strong opinions about content strategy, because
Yeah.
this isn't just about oh, I feel like doing a video on such and such and I'm going to rant about something and put that video up. It's about taking a more strategic approach to the actual
Yeah.
content that you're creating and the type of content and the topics that you're addressing. So let's talk about creating content that is actually in alignment with your customer journey or your buyer journey. Can,
Yeah.
can you tell me a little bit about how you think about that?
Oh, where should I start? So the client journey obviously is the key thing here. So you got to have a very clear understanding of who should be reading this. That's the first part. And what we are trying to help them with or sell at the end of it. So that is all these things about segmentation, defining your ideal client profile, all these good things, which we won't dive into too much. But I have to say them here because again, that's where it starts. And from there, you have to build, like you said, a client journey. And you and I discussed a little bit. Is it a funnel? Is it a spaghetti blob? Whatever. There's so different models. The point is you have to be deliberate and you have to design something. And then you can test whether or not it works to get people from I see something you created to I get interested, I maybe engage with it, like, the client journey. And we have to build this. And we can sit here and do it on a whiteboard and have some educated guesses. That's better than not doing it, but it's more risky than actually doing a bit of client research and figuring stuff out. Because unless you do that part, you run two risks. The first one is you randomly create stuff that does not quite hit the needs of your intended target audience. So you keep blogging for 6 months and there's nothing from it. And I've met consulting firms where people have been blogging for years and there was no tangible business outcome. So why do it then? Right? You might as well scratch the blog, save some time. That's the first part. The second part is that maybe you do create stuff that's relevant enough at the front end part or somewhere in the spaghetti blob of client journeys, but you lose them in the in-betweens, right? They drop off because you missed a step. That's why we talk about the journey, right? That I think describes how I would talk about it. And the closing thought there is the more specific and correct you can get in the way you envision the client journey, the better this stuff works. And I'm saying this because everybody can pull a client journey from the internet, right? There's a template. There's the awareness stage. There is the search phase with however many steps you have. And these things are correct, but they're way too generic. So you got to do the work and research your actual ideal clients to figure out what, if they are unaware or aware, what does that mean? And then you can start thinking about the content. I don't know. What's your take?
Yeah. So I think that, we have, the typical, there's top of funnel, middle of funnel, bottom of funnel is usually some combination of awareness, consideration, decision, something like that. So your awareness is people who know they have a problem of some kind but don't really know what the solutions are. Consideration is when they know what the solutions are and they're kind of looking through them. And then this bottom of the funnel is when they're actually comparing solutions against each other and making a decision. So it's and the funnel metaphor is not perfect. We talked about this a bit because people kind of jump back and forth as they learn new things. People may already have gone through the funnel as a client in one thing and might be interested in coming back to you again. And there's a lot of people above the funnel. And so when I diagram this, I have an above the funnel stage, which is like completely unaware of the fact that there's a problem or there's a solution. They have no idea about any of this. And so what we're doing is we're trying to target our content to each different stage. And so what I'm really interested in talking about today is how you see the content that you create. Like, where does it fit in that in that funnel? Because I think that a lot of people are creating bottom of the funnel content, which is like comparison of solutions. And
100%. 100%.
So I'm interested in talking to you about that, because I think that we probably agree about this. I don't know, but I haven't talked to you about this yet.
100%. And I think it's interesting you point that out in this context, where we talk a little bit more about professional services firms, because they are guilty as hell of that mistake. In fact, I have been guilty of this in the past, because if you are an expert, it's so easy for you to, because you already understand the premises of the problem, you've seen everything, and you are very close to the solution. It's very easy to produce a lot of content around the solution as well, which we could discuss this, but it's a bit oversimplified, which is close to the bottom of the funnel content. What we rarely do is explain why do X or what is Y in the first place, even though that is why we might have to start people. And in preparing for this episode, I actually had to laugh. I came across an article on McKinsey's website, which literally read, "What is digital transformation?" Now, McKinsey having a Mickey Mouse explainer piece of the phrase, right, should give you pause, because yes, they might be doing it for SEO reasons, but they also know it helps to clarify phrases and discussions. I don't know. I 100% agree with you. People spend too much focus on the bottom of the funnel, which that then makes yourself susceptible to talking to the very, very small part of the market, right? The 5%, as it's often called, that are searching for a solution right now, while ignoring all the other 95%. And there's reasons why you might do that, to say it. I can understand why you do this. It's a very high immediacy, right? If I need business next quarter and I talk to these 5%, I might be like, the other stuff takes much longer time and effort, but it's overall the much more effective strategy. That's at least how I see it. I don't know.
Yeah. So where I think it's interesting is part of the job of this content that we're creating is to build trust and respect.
Yeah.
And so if we can do that by creating content that doesn't necessarily address that isn't that close to the bottom of the funnel. We can create trust and respect generating content further up the funnel, even if it's something that people know about already, particularly if it provides some kind of insight. And I think that's where it gets interesting, because you're creating in our case, like, content is usually either entertainment content or educational content or some combination of both. That's when you boil 99% of content on the internet down to it. And in the B2B world, we typically have to be educational rather than entertaining. And it's great if we can bring entertainment into our educational content, but I think that's difficult to do, and some people do it really well. But that's hard. But if we're creating this educational content, it doesn't necessarily have to be, it doesn't have to be PhD level all the time. It can be, so like McKinsey's example that you just gave, it can be some really basic level stuff. It can be basic level, but hit them with your point of view, which might be slightly different than what they're used to seeing, what everybody else is saying, kind of the bland, mediocre average that is, that every consulting firm is saying. But having your perspective and maybe being slightly polarizing sometimes. Alan Weiss does that
Yeah.
deliberately. He does that very well. But I think that the content up the funnel, I think that people are maybe overthinking it. Maybe they're going too deep on it, and
Yeah,
sometimes it's good just to have something that's interesting.
or they think, oh well, that's been explained a million times, or everybody knows this. Which that is
Mm,
I think the French call it the déformation professionnelle, right? If you are the expert, it's easy to forget other people aren't. And so
yeah.
you think, bah, it's obvious, no one will be interested. But yeah, maybe people are interested. I don't know how many clicks the What is Digital Transformation article gets. I was just fascinated by it.
Yeah.
But I think, and this goes back to the point I made earlier about how so much consulting stuff is nice to have. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying clients will be fine if they never buy it. They will be
Hmm.
better off, right? But they might be fine. So um, we really have to think about this and make the case, or to go to your point of educating the audience, help them make the case internally. So McKinsey might as well do another piece called "Why Digital Transformation?" Right? What are the outcomes I could get from it?
Hmm.
Because it's probably a bit hasty to presume everybody knows, and knows in the context of their organization, and can explain it well to the CFO, which is probably eventually the job they have, right? And that takes us also back to the client journey discussion. We have to understand how the journey progresses and
Hmm.
what the specific jobs are on these stages, right?
Yeah.
What jobs do buyers try to do when they are, as we call it, higher up the funnel, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
So the way I think about it, people are the potential buyer is completely unaware that there's an issue. And so at that point, the kind of content that you're creating is
Yeah.
just around saying, hey, there's this problem that people have that you may not realize that you or your company has,
Mm.
and it's actually a pretty big deal. Here's some information about this, and and some people talk about exacerbating the pain and focusing on the pain, and at that stage, to kind of to show people what the true scope of the problem is, because a lot of it's the boiling frog thing. A lot of people in business, they won't take action until it really hurts, but if you can address it earlier, then maybe it's going to hurt less. But that's the unaware stage. Then you've got problem aware, and then you've got solution aware. So problem aware is people who know they have a problem but don't know how to solve it. And at that point, now maybe they're hitting Google, they're asking for
Yeah.
questions, or they're God forbid, they're hitting ChatGPT or something like that and asking questions, trying to figure it out, and then trying to figure out what the scope of the problem and the scope of the solution. And then solution aware is when they actually know, okay, here are some different ways I can approach solving this. And typically people are going back and forth, and this is where I think that the linear metaphor doesn't work so well, because people suddenly realize, oh hey, this is actually a knock-on effect of another deeper problem that we have, and suddenly they go back to the start on that, and then they realize, oh, that solution could actually fix this other thing that we've been thinking about, and so it's kind of, it's messy, it's not as linear as it seems. But I think that thinking about that in terms of the content, and specifically, like, okay, we're going to write a blog article called "What is Digital Transformation?" because we want to have something at that stage, and that's how that post ends up on McKinsey website, I think. So yeah, what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's true, and I think I like especially the differentiation you give there between the versions of varieties of awareness, right? Because
Hmm.
that was a contribution I thought about making to this game of everybody has to reinvent stuff that clearly already works in marketing, right? I made that joke before. But people critique the funnel and go back to the funnel. And it's like, I think I have an idea for the funnel. Did you ever consider that in a consulting context, there's a difference between awareness of the experienced pain
Hmm.
and awareness of the underlying root cause issue?
Yeah.
So I am aware that, oh my God, my company wants to hit the capital markets for the first time, issue a bond. And now there's all these requirements my finance department has to do. And it takes them weeks because we don't even have the right Excel templates. No one has ever done this before. So I'm very aware of the pain. I don't have the right Excel template. which is different from maybe I should have had a treasury management system, a software that does all this stuff for me in the first place. But these are disconnected. So it would be meritful for me to put out content that helps with the immediate pain. Here's an Excel spreadsheet template for you if you want to do it manually. But did you know? And then we follow up with the treasury management system. But I abstain from doing that. It's just your point with thinking about what do we even mean by awareness, thinking about it from different angles. Also something that I don't see enough consulting firms do. Maybe I interact with the wrong ones. I don't know. It's not good enough to say, to write a why you need parenthesis exactly what we are selling you. It's better than not having anything, but it's even better is to target awareness content to the experience pain they had in the everyday, and then from there lead to the root causes, because now they're fully problem aware. It changes from we don't have the spreadsheet template to, oh, maybe we should consider a treasury management software or whatever that was, and then we can start to talk about things. And because we've already taken them through this first step, you thought the problem was X, I showed you the problem is Y. That's already some trust being built on the top rim of the top of the funnel, if you will. Right? They haven't moved.
Yeah, and again, it's interesting because like I think about trust, but it's all the way through. But I think about trust when I think about the consideration stage, which is kind of the next stage after awareness, consideration, and
Yeah.
I actually break down, and maybe we can collaborate on our version of the funnel.
The world needs more funnel.
Yeah, you know, and well, maybe I'll come back to that in a second as a meta point. But yeah, so I think of consideration, and I break that down into three because I break down awareness into problem awareness, solution awareness, and then consideration is consideration interest. So they're interested in you as a potential solution, and then respect, so they respect you as a potential solution, and then trust, so they actually trust you, because I think those are kind of different subsets of somebody's we can get really nerdy here and call it somebody's parasocial relationship with you, where you don't know them, but they feel like they know you. And that's where content, especially like this, where people build a relationship, this one-way parasocial relationship where they feel like they know you. It's the same relationship we have with celebrities we see on TV. So we're like these micro, extremely nerdy celebrities.
Yeah.
So, but you're doing that. You're taking them through these different stages of interest, respect, trust, while they're considering you, and so you can address all of those things in slightly different ways. What I like about those is when you're thinking about the specific content that you're going to create, you can create content that says, okay, I'm going to create something that is going to help people to trust me, or I'm going to help create something that's going to help people to respect me. And you can think about that, and that can give you an angle on the content that you're going to create. That can give you that kind of perspective on that. So that's the way that I use that when I'm talking to my clients about the content that they're creating. I talk to them about, okay, let's make some trust building videos for you, for example, and the way that you do that is it's going to be slightly different, you know. The interest stuff, you know, trying to grab interest. Interest is an interesting thing because you're trying to pique somebody's interest, and that kind of content can be different. Some of that can be like the polarizing content. Yeah. Polarizing content doesn't necessarily make somebody trust you, but it can certainly grab their interest. So that's how I think about this. I'd be interested, Florian, in your perspective on that.
Yeah, so the interest one is, I mean, back to the point of reinventing the funnel, like to all of that, to me, it goes back because I, in a different life, started as a copywriter in an advertising agency, which, by the way, I sucked at, if I can say so myself. So don't hit me up for copywriting. But to me, the funnel, the demand capture versus demand creation, all that stuff, the blobby chart Gartner did with the completely fractured buying journey. It goes back to the AIDA principle, right? Attention, interest, desire, actions. You have to have content pieces for each of those. And the way to pique people's interest, my perspective is, going back to the client research, if you really understand where these people are at the various stages, it takes research for me to understand someone who is under pressure to issue a bond and doesn't have the necessary tools to file the paperwork and do the reporting. I need to get into their heads and their shoes, right? And that's if I can nail that, then they'll get some interest, right? You probably know how much uplift people can create if they get the messaging to a point where it really hits the nail on the head. And that requires, and you said this at the beginning, requires empathy and also some knowledge, obviously, and expertise of the sector, right? But both the things. And regarding the provocative stuff, yeah, sure. But again, I guess you can. The only way to be provocative in a constructive way that isn't cringeworthy requires you to, again, having a good understanding of what the people you're trying to serve are going through and looking for in all these things. So I think I've done enough hammering home on the point of client research, right? It's really important, people. That's
also, on the provocative stuff, I think it really does depend on you as a content creator. A lot of it depends on your personality. And in the context of a larger firm, I think that's got to be tough to figure that part out, like where, finding the brand voice for the entire firm. But just in terms of client research, and I think that this is where you can get really interesting with content repurposing, because I deeply believe in the value of doing research calls, research conversations on people, for example, on Zoom. And I think that that's a great way to do research, and it gives you literally the voice and the gives you a deep insight, and it also builds a relationship. But you can also do something like turn that into a podcast and make that a podcast where you are interviewing your clients and potential clients about the issues that they're facing. And that, that's a great way to create content that you can then repurpose later, and also to do this research that gives you this deep understanding and specific language. And that's a really crucial thing, the specific language that people use when they're describing the problems, because that, going back to your copywriting background, that gives you that copywriting gold for your sales pages, for your information pages.
And honestly, can I get on my hobby horse of this little often underappreciated fact that consultants are content creators by definition. They create content all the time. That's their job, right? They present analysis, they build decks, they run numbers, they have spreadsheets. So because you said repurposing, when I say client insight, just to give an example, a lot of that already exists in the firm or in your various tools if you're a solopreneur, single consultant, whatever.
I just want to call out something here. Florian, you mentioned something, and I think it's the first time I've ever seen it mentioned, but the fact that in your RFPs that you're receiving, your request for proposals, there is a goldmine of information, and that can be repurposed and investigated. And I haven't heard anybody mention that before, and I just think that it's so clever, because I think that coming from my background in kind of the creative sphere and in web design and places like that, like RFPs are a nightmare and usually something to run away from. And I know that a lot of firms that they just don't bother to respond to RFPs because that's not how they're set up.
Yeah, and if you are in major enterprise business and in areas like IT solutioning and so forth, these things will be gold mines, because you probably have to go through the RFPs. Even if you have the client relationship, it's just how the projects are being done. And you want to know what a major solution architect at insert cloud hyperscaler company here, what they care about when they commission consulting work around, I don't know, setting up a new data center facility. Just pick up an RFP and read it, because the questions are in there. And even better, the answers of the expert consultants filling this thing out are also in there. This is what I mean when I say a lot of the, and this is I don't know if it's necessarily awareness stage content, but it's definitely the stuff these people think about as they search for vendors. And there's no reason to not take this and add it to a point where you can then publish it. Obviously, confidentiality, all that stuff, you have to be careful how to generalize it. But I always found these things helpful. And back to my point that consultants create content all the time. They just don't think about it as marketing content. Yeah. Then marketing sits over here and creates marketing content all the time. And sometimes the two meet and disagree with each other. Joking. But if you can make these circles overlap and create a bit of a Venn diagram, you can get so much done and in ways which are very, very relevant and helpful to all these funnel stages. And if I may, just quickly going back to the same is true, by the way, for client research. Yes, you can do surveys. Yes, you can host a podcast. Do all of that. It's brilliant. You can also go to the 3 partners of your mid-sized firm and ask them, tell them, can we sit down over coffee? Each one of you gets their phones out and you pull the 5 last project escalation emails you gotten from your teams because the client was unhappy or had a question. tell me what it was and tell me what the reply was. This is actual insight from the from the trenches, right? Because consultants are in there every day creating content, which has to be relevant. Otherwise, the client won't accept it. So just the project delivery, the content that falls off of the project delivery wagon can be a tremendous gold mine of stuff. You don't need to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I find it amusing, not for the person experiencing, but I find it very amusing when people tell me that they don't have enough ideas for content. You as soon as you start to dig in, you will never have problems finding content if you've been doing what you've been doing for 5-10 years or longer. You are absolutely will have enough ideas for content. There are so many things that you can dig into. The other place that I like to go to is looking at emails over a certain size in your sent folders. So, did you write an email that is over 4 paragraphs long? And go look for all of the emails that you wrote that are over that length, and most of those or many of those are going to include some really, really great content that can be repurposed into a blog post or into something else, some great insights in there. And again, these are addressing specific questions that you've been asked, either by somebody, somebody in your firm on the team or directly by a client. And it gives you such great, because that people are interested in the answer to this question. I think one thing that we should address was something you mentioned earlier on was, people have already said that before. Why should I say it again? And I know that some people will have that marketing hat on. They say, well, of course I want to say it. But there will be some people out there who think, well, it's already been said, so why would I bother to say it again when they've said it just as well or even better? What's your answer to
that? So never underestimate. I always say, this is the expert's perspective, because this stuff, I don't know, doing a data maturity assessment in a large enterprise before they implement AI, whatever. I'm making these examples up. This is 100% of your day. So use the consultants who do this. Tell me that's super boring. Everybody's doing this all the time, because that's the bubble of the world you see. I guarantee you, the prospects we are trying to attract, they do this, 2% of their week max. So even if there's tons of voices who had already said that stuff, chances are they haven't heard them. You have, because you read all the stuff. You read all the blogs. You read all the trade, because it's your job. They don't. So maybe you could also repeat that, and you could do it in your voice, in your perspective. Maybe you can add a little bit of a provocation on top, if you can. And this is often the case, I find. Often you just ask the consultants, you're doing this data maturity assessment stuff. What's the one thing the competition keeps telling everybody that annoys you? And then boom, usually they have an answer. They say, oh my God, these other guys at big firm consultancy, I hate how they say blah, blah, blah. And then, that's how you can find stuff. And then last but not least, and I've made this argument and it's a cheap one, but depending on how the firm is positioned and where it sees itself, and I'll use my former employer, Accenture, as an example, there might just be the plain argument of you can't afford to not say anything about this. Sticking with data maturity or data analytics as an example, it's been said a bazillion times. Do you think Accenture ever came to the idea of deciding to not have content around that? They have to, because they understand themselves and are positioned as a blah, 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 a tech consultancy that's in that space. So these are some of the points you could bring. And then is the last trick you can pull, of course, is to say, well, you tell me it's been explained 1,000 times. What has not been said? And that's a more difficult one, but sometimes you find something.
Yeah, I like that. That's a really great question to ask about that. I think that it's like a river. Our attention, it's so ephemeral, it's passing. There's so many different things that are drawing on our attention and people's concentration. It's like in web design. I'm talking to web designers and about looking, the design of their website, or talking to business owners about the design of their website, and so they're looking at it in their air conditioned, properly lit office on their 29-inch iMac screen. Your client might be looking at it in bright sunlight on on a screen with a cracked screen, while there's a screaming baby in the background, and their boss is asking them for something, and they're trying to desperately get it before they get on a Zoom call. And you know, so we do need to simplify. There are so many things going on in the world, in life. We do need to simplify, and we do need to repeat. And so I think that's why creating content, creating a lot of content, because there is going to be more and more content out there now as people use AI generation tools. A lot of crap content is going to be out there as well, which is kind of good in some ways, because it means that when you put something good out, it's going to really stand out, because
it's maximizing the value of fresh ideas and original thinking.
Yeah.
And publishing something regularly, even if it's crap at first, is the only way, at least I know, to get to the better ideas. You have to have a bunch of bad ones to get to a good one. And it's much easier to get to a good one if you put bad ones out and take the feedback into consideration. If I just list bad ideas here in my office and no one ever sees them, how do I even know they're bad, right? So that's maybe another argument, which, you're right to bring up the content explosion. ChatGPT is going to take us all to
So
will the internet even be usable in 10 years? I'm just kidding.
So one thing that you mentioned there is kind of like the learning journey with content, and this goes back to writing helping us to learn, and like, as for example, I have this podcast which has 125 odd episodes, and I have another couple of podcasts that I've interviewed of more people. But those are conversations that I've had with experts, and I have learned and changed my thinking and changed my position on things, and learned different aspects. Apart from the 100 odd new relationships that I have with people, which is an amazing aspect of podcasting in particular, but just the learnings that you can get from doing that. So you can learn from the content that you're creating. But I do think that it's important to not avoid starting because you feel like you're not ready. I think it's really crucial, particularly at an individual level. I see people all the time. They say, "Oh, I'm not. I want to do this thing. I want to put this out in the world, but it's not ready yet. It's not perfect." The problem is the only way to make something ready is to go and get experience, and the only way to get experience is to start before you're ready. And that's the catch-22. And so I think it's really important that people actually start before they're ready.
I love how you phrase this, because it's the correct way of putting it, is to not be hindered by your feeling of it not being perfect. That's different from the advice I also sometimes hear, which is, just start. I have a problem with that, because if you're a management consultant who wins their business based on their expertise and reputation, don't just put out any old stuff, right? Do put some work into it. And this is also the reason why a lot of this content stuff is so difficult. It does require investment and effort. And so
there's a fine line there, because you don't want to put it out because it's not absolutely perfect.
Perfectionism is bad. Just hitting publish on any old crap, is also bad. So that's why I like
you've got to use a bit of judgment here, and if your content could be mistaken for something that ChatGPT spat out when it was asked, something, then maybe you need to rethink. It's got to be insightful, it's got to be interesting, but there has to be a place for the learning curve, and this is my I do take issue with people who say the content that you create has to be top quality. I agree that that's what we should be aiming for, but you also have to publish stuff at the start, even when this isn't as good as Alan Weiss would have written, or this isn't as good as Florian's would have written, but it's still good enough to be useful to somebody. And I learned while I created this, or I wrote this,
And that's the magic part, right? Is the quality requirement comes in at do you understand the audience, and can you offer something to them that's helpful?
Yeah,
and it could be the shittiest finance Excel template ever, but it rescues my Thursday because I have to hand the thing in on Friday. You're golden, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be fancily formatted. It doesn't have to be perfect macros. The file name can be crummy, but it helped me. I think that's the threshold. You are, at the end of the day, you are not the last instant of controlling quality. The recipient is. If it's good enough for them, you did well. So.
That's the thing. Does it actually help somebody? And I think that's where, when people are doing stuff like They're doing, particularly with things like video, where it's quite technical. You've got lighting, you've got the video, you've got the
Exactly.
audio, and all that kind of stuff. You've got your background to think about. You've got the fact that you've got the wrong pair of glasses on, so your glasses are really reflective on the screen. All of
Yeah.
these kind of things that go into thinking about this. But ultimately, it's what you're actually saying. It's the words that you're saying and the meaning of those words that's truly important. Now,
Yeah.
obviously, you need people to be able to hear them, and you would like them to be able to see you. It's much more important, by the way, that they can hear you clearly than that you look good. But
Yeah.
the actual insights and points that you were making are far more important, and I think that's where people are kind of optimizing for the wrong thing. They're worrying too much about the lighting and the video quality, and yeah, it's nice to have all of that. And I've got a free guide on how to do that if people want to get really good at that stuff. But ultimately, it's more important that you've got something important to say that's interesting and that's insightful and is helpful for your potential client, because that's what it's really about at the end of the day.
Which is where we get back to the client journey, right?
Yeah.
And really understanding it. So I would worry about that a lot more than I would worry about the actual outputs, because once you have that figured out, who are they? How are they progressing through the thing? In the process of figuring it out, you will already bring knowledge together that essentially, the more you do the research, the less you have to worry about having good content at the end, because you will have that.
Yeah.
It comes from the conversations, comes from the insights and all of that. I know we run out against time, right? I just have one more pointer I wanted to give, because I see two mistakes which are getting made all the time. And we mentioned the first one at the beginning. Small and mid-sized firms too often do not have the top of the funnel content. So they don't make the clear case for why I should buy their nice to have service. If you're in the situation, try and fix that. Very large firms have tons of top of the funnel content. They sometimes overshoot it, because it gets so far out ahead and lofty that there's little connection back to the business. When I had roles of a content manager nature in those firms, that's what I tried to cut back on. Like, the through line to the business at the end always has to be there. The client journey design, that's where you have to, that's the conflict line. What does the client want? What does the firm want? It's not always 100% aligned, but you got to stitch together as close as you can on that stage, and then create the content that sort of fits that exercise.
Yeah, and so my background is in software engineering, so I always look at these things from a kind of through that engineering viewpoint. And so the bottom of the funnel content is really clear and obvious to me as to what, here's how to fix your problem. That stuff is really, it's that lofty stuff that I personally miss out on creating sometimes, and I can see that as well in the small firms and small the solo consultants and people like that who I'm talking to, because it's that that's where you can take a page from Accenture or McKinsey or people like that,
Yeah.
and say, okay, we're going to kind of address some of the the 40,000 foot view stuff, which should, if you've done your buyer's journey correctly and you've done some research on that, it should align.
You can bring that
directly
back
down
to something tangible for the business. But let me, I'm not going to say the name of the firm and the name of the sport, but I did work a little bit many years ago rolling out a insert sport money leak research study, and I guess people can find it, that basically ranked certain sports clubs by their financials. And it was a huge success nationally. Like, the press, like, we would have coverage in all national outlets. Very unfortunate that we did not have a national sports practice. So it was business was completely irrelevant exercise in that country, and it was a pricey translation. But anyways, so these things happen as well, and it's not the place you want to be.
Let's wrap this back to the title here, because we said we were going to talk about creating effective thought leadership content. So one thing I just want to talk about quickly is thought leadership. It's one of those terms, it's a bit wishy-washy. Some people really don't like it, some people like it. I did consider using thought leadership in the title of this podcast. I decided to go with the recognized authority, because I was more interested in the building authority side of things. But I think that thought leadership is really important. Can you just tell me a little bit about how you think about thought leadership and what thought leadership means then in terms of content?
Yeah, so I think there's plenty of definitions out there, and I'm not trying to give you one because I don't think I have one specific one ready. For me, it is this question of, which it always comes back to this entire marketing, content publishing, all that stuff should just be an extension of consulting. You ought to be helpful to people. That's what it's about, right? Help them achieve business objectives. That's the industry we're in. And there's a paid part, which is the consulting engagement, and there's the unpaid part, which is the marketing department. But coming back to, so thought leadership to me in that sense means having helpful thoughts, having helpful thinking that leads the recipients of the information to the next step, closer to the good outcome. And that's how I tend to think about it. I know there's other notions of, oh, I'm a thought leader in the sense that I'm a leading thinker, like I'm 2 years ahead and 15 books ahead and all of that of the client. Also true, also helpful, but it doesn't have to be that, not necessarily. If you have helpful, fresh, original insights that help me with step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of my thought leadership, you don't have to be 20 years ahead. You just have to give me the next thing to hold on to so I can make progress. And I think that is, I don't know if that's too practical for you, but I think it's a very workable definition of the phrase. I didn't want to get to the definition, sorry. But
I think that the key thing there is having those insights. And I think that those insights, if you are not already having them, I guess I'm talking to people who are kind of back in early stages, but if you are not having a lot of insights around your area of expertise, then I think that there's 2 things that you need to do. One is you need to talk to more clients about the problem directly, and 2 is you need to write much more about it. And I think that doing those 2 things will lead you to those insights. I think I strongly believe in that you will get to the stage where you will, if you talk to enough clients and think about what they've said, you will get to the stage where after you've had some of those conversations, if you record them on Zoom, I've done this for a book about building authority. I think I had 40 conversations with people, and by the way, people are really responsive. You say, hey, I'm doing some research for a book, I'd love to interview you and just get your thoughts on this, and I'll record it, I just want to use it. Now you could also pitch that as a podcast, which then gives you this ultimate repurposing, and I think I really love doing that as a concept. But doing those calls will give you a massive amount of insights into the problem and potential solutions and what people have tried, and you will definitely have enough information to turn that into a book 100%. Because I know that people kind of think about, what am I going to write about and where am I going to get those ideas. So I really believe in that. And then the other thing is actually writing, just formulating your thoughts in writing in a way that other people can read it. I think that is one of the best ways to come up with insights and connect paths.
Or as a former in-house marketing guy, just give it to me. Just give it to the marketing team. We can publish it for you. Because if you're a consultant, you are a thought leader in my sense of the word already. You are already the lead climber in the project of guiding the client up the path because you have the expertise, right? You can make sure they're safe. You're already in that position. Just share the damn stuff. Sorry.
My last thing.
We can help you get it published. We do not have the expertise. I do not know anything about treasury management system implementation. I know how to publish it when you have it, but you got to give it to me.
Yeah, and getting that, and this kind of leads me around. I put up a guide recently on LinkedIn. I have it available for download. It's a PDF guide for how to create content efficiently. Like how to create high quality content efficiently. And one of my favorite things to do, and I do this now with clients, is I will interview them now. I've got experience in interviewing a lot of people as a podcast interviewer, but I think that interviewing experts, and if you are somebody who is very busy, but you are a true expert in your field, getting somebody to interview you for 20 or 30 minutes, if you have the right set of questions and somebody who knows the questions to ask and can figure those things out, what you can do is you can get a mountain of content. You can get a month's worth of content from a 30, 40-minute interview. And so I think that's a really time efficient way, if you are somebody who's busy, is to get somebody to actually interview you. I think it's a great way of creating content, because that, when you were talking, Florian, about, give me the content. Well, maybe they don't have the content in any kind of form, but how about get on a Zoom call with me? And I'm just going to transcribe I'm gonna interview you. We'll even turn that into a podcast. That's going to be the new podcast for the firm. I'm going to interview all the partners. I'll just go around, like, we've got 4 partners, so we'll interview each one of them every month for 30 minutes. And suddenly, after 12 months, you've got all of this content that is thought leadership content. You've got podcasts, you've got all of these web pages, you've got video that you can put up, and video is really important for, again, trust, engagement, and reach on social media. And those are ways that you can do all that on a fairly short time commitment. Like, if you've got your principles like you talk about, like, that's a 30-minute commitment once a month to create something that is hugely valuable.
And here's the point. Yeah, sorry. Here's the point for the marketers on the line, right? What you're describing there, that process, the marketing team has to have that, and they have to be the thought leaders, the guides through that process. The consultants will not sit down and prepare an interview and then ask you to, like, you have to put that up. And this again brings us back to the client journey. If you've mapped that out, you will be able to ask them a question, because you'll have determined what are the questions people at that stage have. And you'll know, look, the finance folks we tried to talk to, they are wondering, why does it take so long to put this freaking reports together, or the paperwork together? What are we missing? Why does it take so long? How could we speed this up? That's the question for the, do you know what I mean? Like, you have to build the process out, prepare the interview, and then when we run similar processes, we like to send 1 or 2 questions a week or 2 weeks in advance. And then because they have that, the consultant now has it in the back of his or her brain, and every email they read, every client interaction becomes input to that answer. And when they show up for the interview, it'll be, like you say, it'll be 20 minutes stuffed with good stuff, and it'll be easy to convert into content for a month. Yeah.
I'll even give you some questions to start you off, and you can ask these questions, and these will be useful. Who is your ideal client, and what's the challenge that they're facing? If you ask that question to your principal, they will give you a really detailed and great answer that you can use in marketing. What are the common mistakes that they're making when they try to solve the problem? What is something that they can implement, or what they can do to actually fix the problem? What is a common myth or misunderstanding in this field, or what are our competitors saying? I like your one. What are our competitors saying that drives us nuts when you hear it? I don't think I worded.
Or where are they lying? I've asked this as well, and you'll be laughing at the answers you can get.
And then getting to unique point of view. What do you believe that most people don't believe, or what do what's our perspective, and trying to figure that out? So what do you believe that that most people are getting wrong? Something like that. So those questions are a great starter point for, and you'll notice that like all of those are generic. You could ask those to anybody in any field about any topic, and you will still get a month's worth of content for your social media just by asking a principal, an expert in their field, asking them those questions on camera and recording it. Because then you've got your podcast, you've got your video, you can turn that into pages for your website, blog posts. You can expand on those. You can turn those into carousels and do all that content repurposing stuff. There's so much that you can do with it once you've got that original content, but you can only get that content if the person might be you, if you're the principal, if you're the expert, you can only get that content if you are truly an expert in your field and you know what your client's issues are. And this comes back to understanding the buyer's journey, right?
Yes. And this comes back to, and I really love the questions, but I do anticipate that you'll have to really push hard as the interviewer. You have to push for specificity in all of these, especially the first one. Because, and I'm not like saying this to my clients, I'm not thinking of anyone in particular, but I can totally foresee people answering that first question. Oh, our ideal client is the entire C-suite of all of the automotive industry in Germany, which is not a thing. It's an amorphous blob. Like, you got to be more specific than that. This is a humongous.
We specialize in selling to businesses. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we target the C-suite because we don't even know what CXOs they have. It's just, we imagine a suite full of guys, probably because it's usually guys who are very important. Yeah. No, push. That one is a tricky one. All the others, yes. And even if you have to push, that's already a fruitful conversation for both content and, again, the business, because if you push them very hard, they might figure something out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I want to address one final word in the title, which is effective. So we talked a lot about creating the content, And I had a really interesting conversation yesterday, actually, with a lady called Cheryl Plouffe, who was on my podcast and on LinkedIn Live and everywhere, like this one is. And so we were talking about lead generation through content and how it's difficult because, you know, it's difficult to directly match, and I talked with Chris from Refine Labs, who talks about this a lot. Chris Walker, I think. I hope I have got his name right. But he talks about demand generation and content and the dark web, because it's very difficult to match direct ROI for content, and that can be difficult for a lot of people when they're trying to convince people that they need revenue, that they need funding for content creation, because it's very difficult to track back, because there's this whole kind of he calls it the dark social, where people are sharing your content and people are sharing it on Slack, and people are listening to your podcast. You don't know who's listening to it, and so it's hard to track all of that. But I'm just interested in how you think about the content actually being effective at generating leads. Is there anything that you do with the content in terms of making it more effective for lead generation?
So things I do with the content goes back to client insight and research, right? So you got to publish stuff that's where you can be very confident that it will be relevant to them. And then there are ways where you can sort of guesstimate, right, whether or not that's the case. You have, I don't know, time on page, how many downloads did this get, got it shared, and so forth. I'll let the measurement experts speak to that. I think at the end of the day, it is incremental revenue across programs. So if we invest 250 grand into a marketing function and its programs as a consulting firm, does the line go up after a reasonable amount of time? And I'm deliberately keeping this very simplistic, because I will be honest, I have not made up my mind in full about the whole attribution question. My instinct is to say that is a very real question if you are in a scaled product business with a unified product, like most of these SaaS companies are. You mentioned Chris Walker.
Yes, absolutely.
Because they are in a paradigm where measuring the stuff across all the measurements I have, the volume is so great that the errors, which inevitably happen, even in the software space, even with digital marketing, self-reported attribution, all that stuff, so full of errors. But if I sell, I don't know, 1.5 million licenses or seats in a year, you know, it will average out and the sample will become valid. That's the one thing. The second thing is these guys are in an environment where they have the software. That's the product. The content creation is extra. It's an extra effort and investment. And yes, they have to be very, very smart at measuring it and making sure there's a return, because it's not core to their business. Now, consultants are in the business of thinking and giving people their thinking all the time. Adding a marketing capability just means I go from giving it just to you, Alastair, to giving it 500 to 500 people on LinkedIn also. So it's not as clear-cut a distinction between, is this a marketing investment or is this a core business investment? And so I'm still struggling with the question. That was my tangent on marketing.
No, I love that answer, and I think that's a really great insight. That last piece you said, you are creating this content anyway, so with just a few minor tweaks, you can make it much more applicable to a wider audience and broadcast it to a wider audience. And so for me, the issue with marketing and creating content in the B2B professional services space is that the value of contracts is potentially so high, and the number of potential clients that you need is so low that it's that it could be written off as as a rounding error. Like, all you need is 3 people to see that blog post or that video, if those 3 people are all CEOs of ideal target clients for you. The numbers are so small in terms of you could have 1 million people listening to a podcast. But if all of those 1 million people are not in your ideal demographic, then that 1 million people are irrelevant. But if you've got 10 people listening to it, then and all of those 10 are within your demographic, you don't look like you've got a very impressive podcast. But if your podcast is listened to by Elon Musk and Bill Gates and somebody else, some other CEO, like it's a world of difference. So now I know that you're probably not going to have a tiny podcast listened to by those particular people, but what I mean is that for me, the issue of the numbers, so long as you are, for me, I don't worry about the attribution stuff much at all, because I don't worry about those numbers. So
well, and that's, yeah, that yes, actually, personally, I would agree, right? I'm not too concerned, is my stance, but I would not say don't measure it. I would still say drive everything by the numbers, because
right, interesting.
it's better than not doing it, because you might learn things that are tactically important, the stuff that works.
Yeah, no, that's that. Yeah, so you're using your analytics for learning and improving, which is a different thing, rather than attribution. Yeah. So absolutely, I can get behind that 100%. Yeah.
And the fallacy people make in consulting is to think that the beneficial outcome of the marketing effort, the return on the marketing investment, happens in marketing only. You said it yourself. You said doing the podcast has improved your game so much, you're almost at the point of not caring if anyone were to ever listen to it. You would keep doing it just for the learning. I'm putting some words in your mouth, but
but I get you. Take your point. Yeah, plus the relationships, which is the other side of
And that's it. Consultants are in the business of knowledge creation, knowledge application, and relationship building.
Yeah.
Marketing is the same thing. It's almost, if you play it right and you put it together as closely as possible, it becomes so indistinguishable. You might as well say it's not actually an extra expense, is it? It's the cost of doing business in the space we're in. And the return of doing the podcast is not just 600 listens or whatever per episode. It's us getting better. The colleague who ran 4 interviews completely remodeled the framework we have for these types of, and there's so much outcome of this. I'm very positive that if you only look at the marketing metrics and report that as the return, you're underselling yourself by half at least, because there's so much benefit in the stuff that doesn't get tracked and will never be tracked inside the marketing realm, right? It's outside of that accounting logic. But still very, very valuable for the firm. And I could give you examples to no end. There we have, if you speak to, blanking on his name right now, someone gave us the story of Kuche and Partners, which is a German pricing consultancy. They're famous for determining the price of some Porsche cars, completely shifting the industry away from, we take a bunch of, this is our costs, we add 10%, that's the price of the vehicle. They sort of took them into value-based pricing, all this stuff. They wrote a book once about, I think it's called Pricing Innovation. And you could measure the success of that book against, how many people read it, like how many inquiries did we get, yada, yada, yada. What it actually did was it repositioned the firm as an innovations pricing consultant, which now means they do business in Silicon Valley. They were a very boring, nerdy pricing consultant. Yeah, I'm exaggerating a little bit, in Germany, with some global clients. I'm exaggerating, but now they were it in California, and their consulting practices changed because of that stuff. They are now able to deliver this work that the venture capital firms are after. That's the outcome of that book. Would you have seen that in your dashboard? Don't think so.
Now, I also love the fact that they use the title of book in positioning, because that's actually something that I'm doing at the moment personally, and I've seen it done before, and I think we could get into a whole talk about positioning and specialization and messaging and things like that. But I think that it's really clever that the title of your flagship signature book, that becomes a great way to position yourself.
Becomes the new mission, not the business. The business model is still consulting, right? But that changed their entire game around the thing. Maybe I'm. There must have been other things going on behind the scenes.
But that's fascinating, Florian. We are over the hour mark.
My goodness!
So I think that we better call it a day. Florian, where can people find you if they want to learn more?
So they can either find me on LinkedIn, that'll probably do it, or the small consulting firm I'm running is called Client Friendly, and you can find us under client-friendly.co. That's all
Awesome.
I have. Oh,
I'll
I
link to
also
those in the show
have a
notes.
podcast, but people can find that on the LinkedIn, I think.
Yes, you have a podcast called Unbillable Hours, and I
Yeah.
recommend you listen to it. And it's and you cover some of the things that we've talked about, and some other things with your co-host Ash.
I guess we're slightly geared towards the marketing practitioners in firms which have sizable marketing functions. So if you're in there and need some emotional support, that would be the podcast for you.
Yeah, cool. And Sharon says very interesting.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Sharon.
So thank you, Sharon. And I know we've had a couple
And
of
thanks for
people.
admitting
You know.
you've been guilty of the same thing we all have.
Yes. Yeah.
So
So, Florian, it's been great to chat today. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting to me about this. I think that if you're up for it, we'll do this again sometime. It's been fun.
let's. I enjoyed this a ton. Thank you very much. And
Awesome.
thanks everybody for listening.